Joining us today. I know how busy you are, and I really appreciate your time. We're grateful for the important work you do as educators supporting your students, and we're here to support you. Today, we're going to talk about the foundational skills that every student needs to master in order to become a proficient reader. We all plan instruction by following standards, right? They tell us what the student should be able to do by the end of each grade, but standards don't tell us specifically how we should teach these skills. I remember my first year teaching. I had a lot of information about standards, but I was left wondering how to teach those standards to my students. Today, I'll share practical and effective ways to teach those skills. As you know, this is a two-part series. Here's the big picture of both sessions. There are 4 foundational reading skills that we're going to split between the 2 sessions: print concepts, phonological awareness, phonics and word recognition, and fluency. Here's our agenda for today. Hopefully, you've already downloaded the handout, which includes the webinar slides and some helpful takeaways. These are tools that you might find helpful as you plan and prioritize instruction using your current curriculum. These takeaways are blank, reproducible tools that you can use right away with your students. If you're anything like me, you love getting free stuff that you can use right away. I'll point out those page numbers as we go. We're going to start today with a broad look at the standards and research behind the foundational reading skills. I'll reference specific standards and research studies for each foundational reading skill throughout the presentation. In the introduction to the Common Core State Standards, we're reminded that the focus of the standards is on results rather than how we get to that end. The standards tell us what to teach, but not how. So we're free to use our professional judgment and experience to identify the tools and the knowledge that will be most helpful for meeting those goals. In this webinar, we're going to briefly review some key research findings about reading development, and we're also going to revisit some predictors of reading success. If we keep in mind which content is critical and which strategies are most effective, we can use our instruction and get better results for our students. You may be familiar with the term science of reading. It's been in the news a lot lately. Well, this is the term that we use to label the comprehensive body of reading research gathered over decades of study. This collective knowledge reflects the contributions of many disciplines, including psychology, education, and neuroscience, and it seeks to answer 2 broad questions. First, what knowledge and cognitive processes are necessary for an individual to read proficiently? And second, what are the best ways to teach those essential building blocks to beginning readers and to prevent and mitigate reading difficulties in our older readers? Research compiled in the science of reading provides information on what skills are involved in the process of reading, how those skills work together, and which parts of the brain are responsible for reading development. The information on this slide comes from the Institute of Multisensory Education, and it provides a nice summary of the science of reading. As I said, this is a comprehensive body of research, and it provides a deeper understanding of how we learn to read, as well as brain research telling us which parts of the brain are responsible for reading development. And that leads us to identifying evidence-based practices for teaching foundational literacy skills. So that's an overall look at the science of reading. But what does it mean for instruction? That's why we're here today. Why is that science important? Well, many parents and early childhood teachers assume that children will learn to read if they're exposed to books early in life. However, research shows that 20% of elementary school students struggle to learn to read, and at least another 20% are considered at risk. Furthermore, only 35% of 4th graders performed at or above the proficient level on the most recent National Reading Assessment. This data is from 2019. We know that the data from 2022 that just came out is 2 points lower than this. 33% of fourth graders are now performing above the proficient level. However, researchers estimate that 95% of students can be taught to read proficiently if they are provided with highly effective instruction. So advocates of the science of reading give us a call to action. We must make a commitment to evidence-based reading instruction and end the use of practices that have been shown to be ineffective. You may have heard of structured literacy. Through structured literacy, teachers implement methods that are appropriate for all of their students and particularly necessary for students with learning differences. Structured literacy is explicit. That means that teachers provide a direct, clear explanation for each new concept, in addition to teacher modeling, student practice, and teacher feedback. It's also sequential and systematic. The instruction follows a well-defined scope and sequence with a logical progression from simple to complex. It's also prescriptive and diagnostic. Teachers identify their students' strengths and challenges to plan for remediation, along with continuous formal assessment to inform progress monitoring and teacher actions for differentiation and intervention. Structured literacy is also cumulative. New concepts are layered on previously learned concepts, and frequent review builds automaticity in our students. Let's take a closer look at these foundational reading skills. Why are they so important? Well, it's right there in the name. These are the foundation, the building blocks for literacy development. The foundational reading skills for kindergarten through 5th grade include specific goals for print concepts, which is understanding the organization and basic features of print, phonological awareness, which has to do with spoken words, syllables, and sounds, phonics and word recognition, which is decoding and reading words, and fluency, which is reading with a high level of accuracy at an appropriate rate with expression to support comprehension. Our focus today will be on print concepts and phonological awareness. Next time, we'll focus on phonics and word recognition and fluency. Remember, these foundational skills are not an end in and of themselves, but they are necessary and important components of a comprehensive reading program. If we want to develop readers who can comprehend texts across a range of types and disciplines, they need to have a solid foundation in these basic skills. Now, we know that some students develop the foundational skills very quickly. They're able to read the materials assigned to them, so they enjoy reading and they find it rewarding. Because they're able to decode and recognize words automatically, they can focus on their comprehension. Right from the beginning, these students are exposed to much more text because they read more. On the other hand, students who develop these skills slowly will have difficulty. And maybe that's why you signed up for this webinar. You probably have some students in your class who are struggling. Students who struggle to read are often assigned materials that are too difficult, so they become frustrated. They find reading unrewarding, and they may even try to avoid any activities related to reading. They struggle to decode and recognize words, so they also struggle with comprehension. Think about the things that we avoid. If we don't enjoy them, we're reluctant to do them. So these students who struggle are exposed to much less text than their peers because they read less, and this has long-term consequences, which can lead to a downward spiral of reading failure. And this can be frustrating and disheartening for students and educators. What do I mean by the downward spiral? Well, students who have difficulty learning to read words accurately and fluently are struggling readers. And these struggling readers will read much less text. Because they have less exposure to text, they don't fully develop the language, vocabulary, and background knowledge they need to become proficient readers. This begins the downward spiral, and these students have a difficult time ever catching up. Keith Stanovich calls this phenomenon the Matthew effect. Students who read early continue improving as they read more and more text. Thus, they become richer in language, vocabulary, and background knowledge. And students who do not learn to read early continue to struggle. They read less, and they're faced with more and more difficult text. So they become poorer with each passing year. And we've all seen these struggling students lose their motivation and interest in reading. Teachers often ask, what can I do to motivate these students? We don't want our students to fall into this downward spiral. Luckily, research tells us that there are strategies to help struggling students catch up to their peers. And today we're going to learn some of those strategies. Let's take a look at some effective practices for teaching foundational skills. First is print concepts. Usually we think of print concepts as applying to very young students, but instruction in phonological awareness, phonics and word recognition, and fluency also begins with early learners. And this instruction continues until their students become proficient. Mastery of these skills is the foundation for building vocabulary and comprehending text. So today we're going to begin with print concepts, understanding the organization and basic features of print. Print concepts include print or book awareness and letter knowledge. These are a child's earliest introduction to literacy. Think about it for a minute. Print is everywhere. And some children have a lot of exposure to books growing up. Their families and caregivers model how to handle a book, where on a page to begin reading, and that printed symbols communicate meaning. In school, teachers use print referencing while reading books aloud to their students, and print referencing is one way to teach print concepts. The other part of print concepts is letter knowledge, where students become familiar with 26 uppercase and lowercase letter shapes, and they learn to associate those letter shapes with their letter names. I'm not talking here about sound symbol relationships. That comes later when we talk about phonics. State reading standards tell us that kindergarten and first grade students must demonstrate understanding of the organization and basic features of print. And research tells us that a child's understanding of print concepts can predict their future reading success. That makes sense, doesn't it? As educators, we know that students who enter school with more print and book awareness have an advantage over their peers. They've gained additional vocabulary and background knowledge through their early exposure to print and books. It's always nice to see the research confirm what educators have experienced while working with students. That intersection of research and practice makes a strong case for teaching foundational reading skills, beginning with our early readers. Here's the first takeaway in our handout. This is a printable tool that you can use right away, and it's our gift to you. The full-size page for this is at the end of the handout on page 17. You may want to note that if you intend to print it out later. If you look at this list, students should be able to demonstrate an understanding of most of these print and book awareness concepts by the end of kindergarten. The takeaway version is a checklist of these skills. Remember, children don't automatically understand how print works. So what's the best way to teach these print concepts? Print referencing during read-alouds in the classroom is an effective strategy for teaching print concepts. This is when an adult shares a storybook with a group and directs children's attention to things like the front cover, the back cover, where to start reading on a page, how we read from left to right, and recognizing that there is a space between words. You can use the takeaway checklist during your read-alouds to track your use of these print and book awareness skills. Researchers suggest using only 3 to 5 print references during the reading of a storybook. We do want students to enjoy the book itself, so we don't want to overdo the print referencing. If you work with very young students, choose a few print and book awareness skills from the checklist to emphasize each time you share a book with students. Repetition is important in helping students to remember these concepts. And don't be afraid to have some fun with it. Have your students come up and point out the different parts of the book during your circle time or your read aloud time. The other part of print concepts is letter knowledge. The standards tell us that in order to develop letter knowledge, kindergarten and first grade students must recognize and name all upper and lower case letters of the alphabet. Most preschoolers can sing the ABC song, right? But have you noticed what they do in the middle of the song? Someone designed this t-shirt that shows what most children sing between L and P. Some children memorize the song, but they're not able to match each letter name to the corresponding visual letter. And that's especially obvious when children get to elemental P. Research tells us that a student's ability to identify the letters of the alphabet by name is one of the best predictors of how readily that child will learn to read. It's almost as accurate as an entire reading assessment in making that prediction. We also know that when students can name the letters accurately and automatically and in random order, it shows how thoroughly they've learned the letter names, which is a springboard for learning and remembering letter-sound relationships. And we'll talk more about that in part 2 of the webinar. Keep some things in mind as you teach letter naming. Most early reading programs teach the uppercase letters first because uppercase letters are more visually distinguishable than lowercase letters. And since uppercase letters are typically learned first, the lowercase letters that look the same as their uppercase version are obviously easier to learn. Think S and Z. We also know that letters with similar shapes confuse students, so we need to be careful, especially with the lowercase letters B, D, P, Q, and G. Studies have found that students had less confusion if they mastered one potentially confusing letter before being introduced to another letter with a similar shape. Here's a table of visually similar letters, and it's at the bottom of the takeaway on page 17 of your handout. Think for a minute about how your current reading program sequences letter knowledge instruction. Are the capital letters taught first? Are the letter pairs that are almost identical in upper and lower case taught more quickly, and that leaves more instructional time for those that don't match? Are you making sure that students master one potentially confusing letter before being introduced to another letter with a very similar shape? That is especially important for students who struggle. So use the takeaway when you're planning the sequence of your instruction. Now let's move on to the next foundational skill, phonological awareness, which is understanding spoken words, syllables, and sounds. Phonological awareness is an umbrella term for the understanding of the units of oral language, including word awareness, syllable awareness, onset rhyme awareness, and phoneme awareness. Phonemic awareness focuses on the individual sounds in spoken words, and this doesn't develop naturally without modeling. So, educators need to teach phonemic awareness skills directly during early reading instruction. As students begin to transition from phonological awareness to phonics, they learn the relationship between an individual sound, or phoneme, and the letter or letters that represent that sound, or grapheme. So in phonics, you see the actual letters that correspond to the sounds. If you're showing your students letters or words, you're working on phonics, which we'll talk about next time. Phonological awareness is mainly a verbal and auditory experience. So let's take a look at that a little more closely. When it comes to phonological awareness, the standards tell us that kindergarten and first grade students must demonstrate an understanding of spoken words, syllables, and sounds. What does the research tell us? We know that phonemic awareness ability is a strong predictor of future reading ability. In fact, it can predict literacy performance more accurately than other variables, such as intelligence, vocabulary knowledge, or socioeconomic status. Students with strong phonological awareness skills are likely to become good readers, but students with weak phonological skills will likely become poor readers. It's estimated that more than 90% of students who have significant reading problems struggle in their ability to process phonological information. The good news is that phonological awareness is one of the few factors that teachers are able to influence significantly through their instruction, unlike intelligence, vocabulary, and socioeconomic status. This table organizes phonological awareness skills into 4 categories: word, syllable, onset rhyme, and phoneme. On page 18 in your handout, you'll find an expanded version of this table that shows the specific skills within each of these categories, along with an example for each skill. Phonological awareness instruction should be systematic. Notice the arrow across the top. The categories become more complex as students progress from the word level to syllables, to onset and rhyme, and then to phonemes. The arrow along the left-hand side also shows that students progress down each category, learning increasingly more complex skills. Let's take a look at the phoneme awareness column. First, students learn to isolate, identify, and categorize phonemes. Next, they're taught to blend phonemes to make a word, and then to segment a word into phonemes. The most challenging phonological awareness skills include deleting, adding, and substituting phonemes. All of the activities in this table build phonological awareness skills, but blending and segmenting are especially critical. From the research, we know that segmenting words into phonemes and blending phonemes into words contributes more to learning to read and spell well than any of the other activities under the phonological awareness umbrella. And that's from the National Reading Panel in 2000. Let's take a look at an example. Since blending phonemes into words is a critical skill, here's an example of a blending lesson at the phoneme level from a teacher-directed phonological awareness program. We know that when you provide a visual representation for phonemes, like these circles, it makes the sounds less abstract and more concrete for your students. This example uses interactive software to display icons. Each icon represents a sound. You could also use plastic discs or math manipulatives with your students. This demonstration lesson uses an interactive iBook on an iPad or a Mac. All right, so in this lesson, I'm going to be the teacher, and I invite you to play the role of student. You'll hear me say both the teacher parts and the student parts to show you how the lesson goes. Let's get started. Here are 3 sounds that make up a word. I'm going to blend the sounds slowly. Then you will say the word fast. For example, I'll say is, and you'll say it fast, miss. Listen, ah, say it fast, mom. Great job. Let's try another one. Listen, say it fast, sun. Nice work. Let's do one more. Listen, ish. Say it fast, fish. Way to go. And you can have fun with this too, especially if your students have their own manipulatives. It may get a little crazy, but that shows they're engaged. And it's such a great multi-sensory way to get them to learn these sounds and how to blend them. Here's an example of a segmenting lesson at the phoneme level. In previous lessons, students have isolated the beginning and ending sounds. This lesson introduces medial phoneme isolation, isolating the sound in the middle of a word. I'll be the teacher again, with you as my students. Here we go. This lesson reviews the rhyme 1, 2, buckle my shoe. 1, 2, buckle my shoe. 3, 4, shut the door. Listen, shut. Everyone, say that word. Ready? Shut. There are 3 sounds in shut. Everyone, say each sound in shut while I touch the icons. Ready? Sh, t. Blend the sound slowly. Ready? Shut. Say it fast. Ready? Shut. Nice job. Everyone, think about the first sound you hear in shut. Say the first sound. Ready? Shh. Now think about the last sound you hear in shut. Say the last sound. Ready? T. Now think about the middle sound you hear in shut. Say the middle sound. Ready? Yes, the middle sound in shut is . The examples we just looked at come from Read Naturally's Funēmics program. Think for a minute about your students and your current curriculum. Do you assess your students and continue to provide instruction to beginning and struggling readers until they master these skills? And remember that your students, even your older students who have significant reading problems, may not have ever mastered these skills. I certainly found that in my 4th grade classroom. Whether you use Funēmics or other materials available to you, keep in mind that you want to systematically move students as quickly as possible through the phonological awareness skills toward the goal of blending and segmenting at the phoneme level. Take a minute to think about possible follow-up activities you could do with your students. In my classroom, students were assigned a sound, and in groups of 3, they arranged and rearranged themselves to make real and nonsense words. You can really have fun with this, and so will your students. If you Google phonological awareness games, you'll get a lot of great ideas. So that brings us to the end of the first part of our Foundational Reading Skills webinar. If you're interested in learning more, check out our Foundational Reading Skills white paper, and it's on our website. There's a link to it in the chat. And please join us next time for part 2, where we'll be talking about phonics and word recognition and fluency. In the meantime, if you want to try out Read Naturally's programs for free, just sign up on our website for our free 60-day trial. Here's my contact information if you want to reach me. You can also reach out to our customer service department at that info email address, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Just a reminder that we will be sending out follow-up emails with links to the webinar recording in about 24 hours. Please feel free to share the recording with your colleagues. And as well, please respond to survey questions that will appear on your screen after the webinar so we can continue to improve the educational experience for all of you and our future webinars. I think with that, we will sign off. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks everybody. Have a good one. Bye-bye.